February 1862. White flags go up over the wintry, smoke-filled earthen walls of Fort Donelson. But for the Union Army, the celebration comes to an abrupt halt. General Ulysses S. Grant suddenly finds himself responsible for 15,000 captured Confederate soldiers. By accepting their surrender, he assumes total responsibility for their survival. Look at the massive scale of this river steamboat. Guarding, feeding, and shipping 15,000 men upriver requires dozens of these vessels, draining immense transportation resources away from the actual war effort. This heavy administrative burden completely paralyzes Grant's offensive momentum. The logistics are so overwhelming that he begins referring to his own prisoners as the elephant. Capturing an enemy is only half the battle. Because the Union government has failed to establish a coherent national policy for prisoners of war, Grant has to invent one on the fly. Managing tens of thousands of captives operates as a critical strategic weapon. It forces a commander to make impossible choices that dictate the entire pace of the war. By July 1863 at Vicksburg, the math gets worse. Grant captures 30,000 Confederates. He knows that trying to ship that many men up the Mississippi River would completely freeze his army in place. To bypass this logistical nightmare, Grant makes a highly controversial choice. He issues field paroles to the entire 30,000-man garrison. In military terms, a parole is a formal agreement where a captured soldier is released on their honor, promising not to fight again until they are officially exchanged on paper for a captured enemy soldier. But the desperate Confederate government cheats the system. They unilaterally declare the Vicksburg men exchanged without Union consent, immediately putting those 30,000 soldiers back into combat. Issuing field paroles saved Grant's local momentum on the river, but it destroyed the fragile trust holding the national exchange system together, forcing a much darker strategy. In 1864, Grant is promoted to General-in-Chief. The exchange system has completely collapsed, and as you can see in this photograph of a squalid camp, captive Union soldiers are suffering undeniable starvation in Southern prisons. Facing immense public pressure to bring those men home, Grant makes his second impossible choice. He firmly halts all prisoner exchanges across the board. This photograph shows Black Union soldiers in uniform. The Confederacy explicitly refuses to treat them as legitimate prisoners of war, often executing or enslaving them. Grant draws an absolute moral line: no exchanges whatsoever until the South treats every Union soldier exactly the same. This balancing scale illustrates the brutal mathematics of attrition. Returning 40,000 healthy Confederate soldiers in exchange for a fraction of starved, physically unfit Union soldiers creates a massive battlefield imbalance. Resuming exchanges would immediately give the Confederacy enough reinforcements to prolong the war indefinitely. Grant absorbs the intense political backlash of being called a butcher. He understands that mathematically, halting the exchanges is the only way to bleed the Confederate Army dry and end the conflict. By April 1865, the strategy of attrition succeeds. The Southern military apparatus collapses, and Robert E. Lee formally surrenders to Grant at this stately brick home and Appomattox courthouse. Here, Grant makes his third major choice regarding captives. He once again issues generous field paroles to the defeated Confederates, explicitly ordering them to take their horses and go home. He does this to intentionally disperse the men. Sending them back to their farms prevents the disbanded Confederate Army from melting into the hills and turning into a localized, endless guerrilla insurgency. Following Abraham Lincoln's assassination, the political climate in Washington suddenly pivots from reconciliation to vengeance. The new president, Andrew Johnson, introduces a severe threat. He moves to formally indict Robert E. Lee and other paroled Confederate officers for treason. Grant fiercely defends his former enemies against the president. He argues that the Appomattox parole is a legally binding military contract that explicitly protects these soldiers from civilian prosecution. If the civilian government breaks this military contract, the terms of surrender are completely voided. Legally, the Civil War could reignite overnight. Grant delivers a strict ultimatum. He threatens to immediately resign his commission as head of the army if Johnson does not honor the paroles, forcing the president to back down and drop the charges. Grant's handling of prisoners of war evolved from a desperate attempt to maintain momentum at Vicksburg to bleeding the enemy in 1864, to enforcing the Appomattox paroles. He transformed a crushing logistical burden into a legal shield that secured a magnanimous and lasting peace.